So unless you live under a rock, you've seen that the French Open has been playing for the last 2 weeks. Today was the final against Alcaraz and Zverev, and Andy Roddick, after the match was over, by the way, he's another former Grand Slam champion, he has a podcast and he made a comment about Zverev being type 1 diabetic after he had lost the match and how challenging it must be to play tennis, and how he feels that the ATP does not do a good enough job of outlining diabetes and what it's like for Zverev to play tennis with type 1 diabetes. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Edin from Evidence Nutrition. I have an education background in nutrition and dietetics, specifically in sport. I used to play tennis at a very high level in the ITF, and I have type 1 diabetes. So I feel like I'm more than qualified to speak on this and to hopefully help educate you guys on what diabetes is and truly how difficult it is for Zverev to be playing, as Roddick said, over 25 hours over the span of 2 weeks, plus training and everything else that goes into preparing for a Grand Slam final. It's pretty interesting, so let's run the clip.
Oh, by the way, like something that doesn't get talked about, I have this written down, Zverev being a diabetic and actually giving himself insulin on switchovers during matches.
Really?
Never gets talked about, ever.
I don't think that got mentioned in the broadcast at all.
It did finally, because they showed it at the end. And for a lot of his career, he wasn't allowed to inject on court. They have some rule against it. And finally he is now, but he has this little like, it looks like a Dopp kit that you would take if you went to stay in the Hampton Inn Myrtle Beach for like 3 days, right? Like he has this little thing that you would take, and he has all of his stuff, checking his insulin and adjusting if needed. He used to have to go off court to do it, but like not a big enough deal is made that Zverev is playing these matches. He spent 25 hours on court as a type 1 diabetic. I get tired.
It's crazy.
I did a walking Peloton treadmill thing yesterday. I was dying because I had to walk uphill a little. My insulin's fine. Not enough made of that. If we're going to be good storytellers in tennis, the fact that that doesn't get mentioned to the point where we're sick of it is absurd. I don't know that I fully understood the life consumption of a type 1 diabetic. My wife's father is a type 1 diabetic. The constant monitoring, the dings on the phone when stuff gets too, it's nonstop. And the fact that he's negotiating a 5-set Grand Slam final while also having to monitor insulin intake for being a type 1 diabetic, and the fact that that's not like, that's not normal. Like tennis isn't normal, being isolated for that long. Like the NBA finals, and God love them, it's my favorite thing to watch. Playing 42 minutes in air conditioning, having an off day, and then coming back again. Try playing 5 hours, 25 hours over the course of 2 weeks while also practicing on off days, while also apparently managing your insulin. I don't know how we don't talk about that more.
So what is diabetes in a nutshell? Type 1 diabetes is the only one we're going to cover here, but type 1 diabetes is technically an autoimmune disease, meaning that your body attacks its ability to create insulin. So over time, because of our pancreatic beta cells are being attacked, we are now no longer able to create insulin, that is myself included as well. As a result, we need to take exogenous insulin or injections of insulin, or if you don't choose to take injections of insulin, you might know someone that has a diabetes pump or an insulin pump. That's usually something you'll find on someone's belly or on their lower back or bum, and that administers insulin through a piping mechanism of some sort. That is not the case with Zverev. Zverev is taking insulin through injections, and I'm not sure why that rule exists or how archaic it is that he's not allowed to take his insulin on court. It's something around branding reasons, but I think it would be very wise for the ATP to work towards allowing him to take it on court. I think it'd be a great way for them to boost engagement and show a lot of kids that have diabetes that, you know, they can participate freely in tennis. I actually didn't even know this was a rule until Zverev came out about it and had an issue with it in Monte Carlo.
Djokovic set, the second one. Is it 9?
9 breaks, exactly.
And we've had 4 so far in this second set.
Too late. Because they asked you to do this outside. We gave a chance.
Sorry.
No, okay.
If they want to discriminate like that, then
No. Alexander, I'm just passing the thing.
It's not your fault.
Okay.
I talk to him every week.
Conversation in the background was to do with Zverev's diabetes. I just wonder whether...
Somebody doing it openly, rather than hide.
Alexander.
No, I'm not complaining to you. I'm just saying.
No, sir.
I'm assuming he got his EpiPen out again, and Carlos Bernardes has been instructed that he actually has to go off court to do it.
But then he was told he was too late now.
Yeah, during the break we were watching some replays, but we just heard in the background Carlos Bernardes and Alexander Zverev having a little bit of a chat. That we can only assume Zverev got his EpiPen out just to test his blood sugar levels, and Carlos Bernardes told him that he had to actually go off court to do that, which Zverev didn't take particularly kindly to. He wasn't blaming Carlos Bernardes, but made the point that they should almost want him to do it on court to kind of promote it.
So insulin is used in order to help shuttle glucose into the cell. Think of insulin like a key. It unlocks the door to allow the glucose to get into the cell. Without the key, the door stays locked and the glucose stays in the bloodstream and just raises blood glucose levels up, but never actually allows the glucose to get into the cell. So your body thinks you have a lot of sugar on hand, but your muscles need more sugar because they never got any. Kind of messed up, I know. Here are some applicable ways that diabetes actually impacts people playing a sport. When your body has an elevated blood glucose, it actually makes it quite challenging for you to participate in sport, because as I mentioned earlier, your blood glucose is up high, but it doesn't mean that the cells or the muscles in this case actually have any glucose at their disposal. So what ends up happening here is your body, instead of using glucose, turns to fats as a source of energy in order to survive, or in this case, continue playing the sport. And as a byproduct of breaking down that fat, starts to create something called ketones. When you get a high enough level of these ketones in the blood, this can result in something called diabetic ketoacidosis, which can be very dangerous and can make people with diabetes very sick. Even before this happens though, they'll start to feel nauseous, they'll start to cramp early, they'll start to feel very tired and weak with very low energy. Not good overall. So how does that change? Well, simple things like having a banana. If he's consuming that glucose and isn't able to take his insulin midway through the match if he needs to, then he's no longer able to utilize the sugars from that banana, and it's gonna end up running his blood glucose up, and he's gonna be at high risk of getting that thing called diabetic ketoacidosis. Again, not good. Which is interesting because if you look at other tennis players while they're playing or while they're on the change of ends, they're usually consuming gels, which have carbohydrates, energy drinks or Gatorades, again, which have lots of carbohydrates, or bananas and other various fruits like dates, again, lots of carbohydrates. So Zverev needs to keep his insulin on hand because he's monitoring his blood glucose, not his insulin levels. He monitors his blood glucose so that he knows how much insulin, the medication, to administer to his body so that he can perform at his best. But it's very important that he doesn't take too much insulin, because then he'll experience something called hypoglycemia. So up until this point, we've been talking about hyperglycemia, which is the increase of blood glucose levels. Hyper, increase, blood glucose levels, glycemia. Hypoglycemia is the opposite, having too little in the blood, which is equally as bad, if not worse, in my opinion. Low blood sugars are effectively when you utilize the body's entire stores of glucose in the blood up, and you have no more left to replenish it. Ways to deal with this are consuming all those carbohydrate things we talked about, like Gatorades, fruits, gels, etc. But as you guys know, in tennis, he can only consume those things when he's on a change of ends. And there are very few things that feel worse than having a low blood sugar. Then you can start to feel weak in the knees, extreme sweating, slurred speech, dizziness. The way I describe it to people is you're pretty much drunk without the fun beverages beforehand. So as a result of this, it's very important that you stay on top of testing your blood sugar all the time, or checking it with things like a continuous glucose monitor, and taking insulin doses as necessary. So this is a very calculated thing, because as he exercises more, his blood glucose actually drops. So the longer the match goes, the more he's at risk of a hypoglycemic episode. So it's quite a challenge, let me tell you. It's pretty much a full-time job of measuring, taking medication when needed, and eating a lot, especially over the span of 5 hours. And as he gets more and more active, he's more and more sensitive to his insulin. So his dosage actually has to change, and the math changes over time. So it is a constant struggle that he has to go through on top of all of the other struggles that every other player goes through. But with a low blood sugar and a high blood sugar, one thing I want to discuss is how much more inefficient it makes your body at doing simple things like staying hydrated. One of the symptoms you feel with a high blood sugar is thirst. And the reason we feel so thirsty with a high blood sugar is because our kidneys are trying to get rid of all that extra glucose built up in the blood, so it needs to push it out of the body, and the only way it does so is by urine. So on top of sweating loads and needing to pee very often, now our glucose isn't being utilized properly, and neither is our water. Same thing goes with low blood sugars. We actually end up sweating significantly more, getting confused, which can impact the shot selection that you have, or any of the decisions you make in a split-second sport like tennis. And both of these things can also make tennis players significantly more moody. Now, I'm not saying that that's why he throws his rackets, etc. That's not an excuse, but it definitely does make him significantly more agitated and can really impact his ability to concentrate on the court. So on top of it being like a full-time job to just take your insulin, measure your blood glucose, eat or drink enough carbohydrates during the match to maintain your blood glucose levels, which by the way is next to impossible, but he does his best. He has to really maintain his hydration as best as he can and monitor when he needs to take bathroom breaks, because again, they might happen to him more often than the average tennis player. So yeah, these are just some points I wanted to make on dealing with diabetes and Zverev in this match. I think he played an unbelievable match with hours on court, 25 hours in the case of Roland Garros or the French Open. And yeah, if you guys have any other questions with living with diabetes and sport, I would love it if you guys can leave it down below. I did my best to try to quickly explain it as best as I can, but it is no joke trying to live with diabetes and play a sport, especially at the professional level. If you guys like this video, make sure you guys leave me a like, comment any feedback, because it really does help me understand what it is that I need to improve upon, as I am still new to this whole YouTube game. And if you guys could subscribe if you are new, I would really appreciate that. Have a good one, guys. We'll see you guys in the next one.